You have to reinforce the cultural aspect you care about in actions every day. I think this is where most founders, and I think big or small company doesn't matter, get this wrong, which is you're busy, things are happening all the time, and you just forget. And culture is all about what you do day to day. Like people don't care if you had a good swag or not.
Welcome to the Startup Field Guide, where we learn from successful founders of high growth startups how their companies truly found product market fit. I'm your host, Hannah Steinhardt, and I'm joined today by my colleague Madhu, who will co host the conversation. Today, we'll be diving into the story of Relyance AI, an unusual ventures portfolio company. Relyance is a global privacy compliance and data governance platform that allows enterprises to protect customer data, avoid expensive fines, and build customer trust. It provides visibility and control over all enterprise data processing. Joining us today is Abhi Sharma, CEO and co founder of Relyance. Welcome, Abhi.
Thanks for having me.
We're so excited to have you on the podcast. We'd love to chat with you about the early days of building Relyance, the initial product market fit journey, and we'll dig deeper into how you're thinking about building a strong company culture as you scale. I'll hand it over to Madhu to get us started.
Yeah, Abhi, welcome again. I think we just want to start out with how the Lions got off the ground. So we'd love to hear your origin story.
Yeah, certainly. It was early 2020. My previous startup had was getting acquired, and like any founder, I was in complete soul searching mode on what I wanted to do next. And at that time, since I had some time, I was personally obsessed with this esoteric academic interest is, do we make slower progress in society because we are hyper specialized? The problem statement was, where are the Leonardo da Vinci's of the world today? Believe it or not, I spent a lot of time almost academically researching it like a data scientist, and concluded that, and I'm happy to share this offline, that if you really look at the top 2000 most impactful innovations that really changed human society, they were all done by polymaths, which are people who were non superficial experts at one or more fields. And that was defined the arc of the inspiration for me of what I wanted to do next, which is take what I was good at, which is compilers, machine learning, and observability, and intentionally apply it to a completely different domain. And my two areas of interest was biotech, which I knew nothing about, and then this idea of like governance and ethics and AI, which was obviously important and very topical to me. And as a happenstance, I got into a deep conversation with my co founder, who was an operator in the space and in a parallel world, also thinking about this problem. And she had seen solutions after solutions fail to address the heart of the problem in the world of governance and AI adoption and privacy, and was already thinking about how to solve this. So one day we just got into this conversation, and I was like, hey, why aren't people doing this? And why wouldn't we solve it this way? And why aren't we treating this as an APM problem? And she was like, what's an APM tool? And I was like, that was the light bulb moment for me, because I was like, okay, so that means the entire industry is approaching the problem wrong. Like everybody was doing a top down approach, and we really started to think about it from a very bottoms up perspective. And then it was also, I researched it a little bit. It was an underserved market, a very important market. I came from the world of ML and AI, and I knew this was going to be a big tectonic shift. And so between us, it was a really nice yin and yang to an operator and a person who'd been in the space, and a person who's, hey, why aren't we doing this way? Like, why are people always doing this thing in this particular way? So we had an interesting combination. And the main insight was, we believed, or I believed, we could bring a tectonic shift, a modality shift in how to solve this problem. It was truly like we could go from the BlackBerry to the iPhone, and there is no keyboard anymore. And so because we were so strong, we have this strongly held opinion that we can change the modality in which we can serve the customers in this industry. That was the heart of it, and it was a very interesting set of like ideas coming together. And we started right at the heart of the pandemic to do this.
And as you think about that initial insight that you had, is that the insight that continues to drive your strategy today? Or would you say the insight evolved in the early sort of customer discovery process?
Yeah, actually, this is funny enough where it has exactly stayed the same since day one and continues to be the core foundation. Because there was three things that were happening. One, there was a tectonic shift in regulations. Second, we knew we were going to move into an AI-driven society, and consumers' awareness around privacy and their data was like become a real thing. And so the combination of those three vectors were the core hypotheses, and I think it has become a bigger problem instead of having changed. And we just felt, okay, somebody needed to build that trust and governance infrastructure for the modern world. I mean, it's very similar to how Stripe thinks, okay, we're the payment infrastructure. There was nothing like that. Like there was point solutions and we were trying to do checkbox compliance, but the insight really was like, hey, if these three things are going to happen and we believe this is going to be true, then we got to build something that fundamentally moves organizations from checkbox compliance and really helps them think about trust and safety such that it's embedded in the business operations. And that was the originating thesis, and it has stayed the same. If I would say it is just blown out of proportion, if you will, if not over the last couple of years.
Makes sense. And as one of our core philosophies here at Unusual is this idea of partnering with early adopters as design partners. And so curious about your process around that at Reliance. Who were some of your early design partners that helped you really shape the product? And
Yeah.
were there any surprises along the way?
Yeah, I would say definitely not surprises, but I would call them like interesting aha and learning moments, even for ourselves. So I would say that it happened especially during the pre-product market phase, where once we had decided that we wanted to do this, and especially as having done this before, I wanted to be very meticulous on going about starting something. So what we did is we just put a point of view on a piece of paper of how this would work. And I talked to like about 50, 60 people operating in this space. And I was like, hey, what if the world operated this way for this particular problem? Would this be useful? How would you think? Give me 15 minutes of the time. And the reaction I got from, I would say, more than 40% of the people is, if you're going to build this, and they'd known I was a founder, here's my phone number. I'm happy to tell your VCs this is important, right? And that's when I knew that, hey, sometimes you struggle to get 20 minutes in everybody's time. And here is just like, we're happy to talk about it. And nobody's thinking of it this way. So that was the first trigger of, okay, we've got something meaningful here. And then as we started to build, we had this, our first three customers were like one from an IoT space, large infrastructure company called Samsara. We had a communication platform called Dialpad, and then some like recruiting and HR platform. So it's very clear that it was a problem that was very market segment, market vertical agnostic. And the heart of it, as we had more customers conversations and we really understood what they wanted, it was all about visibility. And what we learned, and the aha moment to the learning through the conversation, was like, actually privacy and compliance and data governance and AI governance is really an observability problem. And people were treating it as a compliance problem. So when you shift the lens on how you look at the problem, you're like, hey, if I can tie myself to every element of data processing change where it really happens, then you can reason about all the second or third order effects over a long period of time. Otherwise, everybody was flying blind. And I think that is the nugget, that the texture that kept coming up again, is we don't know what's happening. We always feel like we're solving the problem from outside the box, having no visibility. So it morphed this to, for us, actually, it's not just a compliance problem, it's an observability problem. And that was the aha moment. And I could clearly see in some of our additional deployments. I don't know if you guys have seen those Claritin DAGs where like they have a hazy pain and then they remove it because you took care of your allergies. And it was that feeling where they're like, oh, I could see clearly. And that was really exciting and the most surprising moment, if you will, in terms of our journey, and very fulfilling at the same time.
And this, as you mentioned before, this is not your first rodeo as a founder. As a second time founder, what were some new learnings for you in this process? What do you say?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say I really underestimated the arc of systems programming of the company on hiring and recruiting. And I think so. What happened is when we started the company, we got 10, 15 people because I had worked with them, and everybody who worked for me for the 6, 8 years is still working with me. And so it was easy. And I think what I forgot to dial in was, it's so great you can get started with your circle of trust, but then you have to build a foundation on the type of people you're looking for, the cultural attributes you want. And I think we just went in our way of hiring it. And then over time, it took me a while to realize that, hey, I took that for granted. Oh, I knew this. Once you started hiring beyond your circle of trust, it was like we were not intentional about it. And I think we made a couple mistakes around that journey. And that was the biggest learning of, I look back and I was like, oh, that's one thing I didn't design explicitly. I think that's what I've concluded overall as an arching theme is as a founder, especially for early stage startup, whatever you don't design with intention falls into however it will evolve as a creature, as a thing, as a system. And it's never intentionally what you wanted to do. So I think that was my biggest learning as a second time founder. There's a bunch of things you do well as you already de-risk on a bunch of mistakes because I already had made them before, if you will. But otherwise, that was, I think, the biggest learning for me.
That's so great, the idea of being intentional, like putting real thought into what you're trying to build, especially when you're trying to build a generational business. And I think that's a great segue into our sort of next topic here, and really curious about the transformations you made to your sales culture recently and your sales strategy. Would you be able to share about what motivated that and how that happened?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, we had a 180 degree on pretty much all things sales strategy. And it was actually from this idea that we just talked about, which is we were, if I were to articulate, it was like we were attentive, but we weren't paying attention. And those are very different things. And I think we were process wise, we were doing all the right things, if you will, but we weren't really paying attention on what needed to evolve and the iteration of evolution to become better. And I think that's what I started to realize is that this was an urgent problem. We didn't have to tell customers this was important. There was budget for this category. So sometimes when you find yourself in that position, then your growth story is very highly correlated to how much refinement you make and how many shots you take at the goal. And so what I ended up doing, it was first the realization that we were attentive but not paying attention was we just went back and treated it as a systems problem. I'm an engineer by heart, so we pretty much took it as the system, broke it down into each component parts and said, where was friction? What was not working? What were we doing that we thought were correct, but actually didn't have the best experience? And time specific examples was it was the time when we asked our customers when we should do an NDA. And we just shifted those things around in the second to third meeting. And suddenly people's perception of trust went up because they were like, hey, we're not asking too early or too late in the process. And we do care about it. But if we were just part of the process, we were just saying, hey, we want to sign an NDA and we haven't shown any value yet. And so people would be like, why? And so there's these stupid things we're doing. But speaking more systematically, the first thing was break the whole system down into component parts and map the entire customer journey and take every component and then say, all right, what are we doing right now? What do we think? Is it a 2-star experience, 3-star experience, 5-star? Okay, how can we make it 4-star and 5-star? And then just continue to ask the questions until everybody was out of ideas on how we can improve. And then we say, all right, fine, we can't do all these things in the next 3 weeks, but what can we do today? And why can't you not do it yesterday as of 4 months from now? And sometimes it just happened that when we had that kind of conversation, the first thing that would happen, people actually, I don't know why we do that. We don't need to do that. So we really iterated on that. Second thing, I really focused my team to go down on 3 whys. And we talk a lot about this in Unusual Startup Field Guides as well. On it's so important. And the sales team and the sales strategy, we're doing a lot of what and not enough why. So I really had to shift people's attention on the why and the core of the problem. The what is just a means to an end. And we provide the best means to an end, but it doesn't mean enough if you don't focus on the why. Also in this industry around compliance, it's a very underserved market for AI governance and privacy compliance. And so it's very important for our sales team to be more educative, more problem solving oriented versus being very salesy, if you will. And we also built the value structure, and we have the fun jingle at Relyance we call time, find, bottom line. And we want to make sure that when we are serving our customers, we are able to attribute in the discovery an element of value on all 3 dimensions. because that's when 1 plus 1 is actually more than 3. And that was very important learning. At the moment I saw the people and the sales team understood that, it just took off and it just changed the entire trajectory. For the last several months, my POC conversion is 100%. And that is the reason of those 3 layers of re-architecting the whole strategy.
That's amazing. That's an amazing transformation. Congratulations. I'm sure it
Like,
was, you make it sound like it was easy, but I know that it was not along the way. So that's awesome. And as you're talking about it, I hear so much of the unreasonable hospitality philosophy baked in there. As we recently reviewed the book Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Guidara at your recommendation in our book review series. And I'm curious how you originally came across the book, its philosophy. Like, how did you get started on that hospitality focus?
yeah. So first of all, I was introduced to that book by my wife.
Mm,
She read it and she's like, "You got to read this." And then both of us, we love the TV series The Bear. If you have seen it, if you haven't, I recommend to everybody who ever listens to
yeah.
this podcast. And Will's an exec producer, especially on the third season. She told me, like, she read the book and she's like, "You got to read. This is amazing. The best thing I've read." And I was like, okay, cool. So I picked up the book, and I think I remember this was like 7:59 p.m. on a Friday evening, and I could not go to sleep because it
Mm,
was probably one of the most, like, team culture, pursuit of excellence with tangible storybooks that I had ever read in the last 15 years. So I read, like, I remember I stayed up until 3 a.m. and I was just reading the damn thing. I didn't finish it, but it was like a page turner. And then once I read the book once, I just was like, my brain exploded of how many things I could take that and apply as a tech founder to my company. And it's like every page was like notes. And I've read the book 3 times. And the other thing was, like, the other thing I think personally resonated with me, like, the whole idea of unreasonable hospitality is very core to Indian culture, if you will. And I was raised that way, and it's like very hard to that idea. And so it appealed or moved me into my core. And then there was so much tactical, practical advice. So I guess I have to give credits to my wife on all of that. But it was just a beautiful book. And I pretty much, like, every page was a little note on, okay, here's what I'm going to do tomorrow. In fact, my all hands meeting, I'm sure you guys have read the book. So we run our all hands as a pre-meal service now. It's pretty much the same framework, and it's all broken down into as if we were running a pre-meal service before we started the day or the week, and we do it every week, all hands. And it's run like that as part of the book.
wow, I love that. I was just thinking, I have two funny thoughts. One is I recommended the book immediately to my partner
Yeah.
after I read it. So I guess your wife and I are on a wavelength because I was like, he needs to read this. This is going to be so impactful for his work. So that's funny. But I think it's also really interesting that you were able to so immediately apply the learnings from a really different work environment, a restaurant, for that matter, a fine dining environment, onto your work as a software company founder. So in our book review, we tried to draw that line for our audience. And I think it's cool that you were able to just do that, like, innately. And I'm curious what some of those key lessons were that as you were reading, it sounds like at least the way you run your all hands has changed. I'm curious, what other things have you taken from the book?
Yeah, there's a million of them, and I'll tell you 3 or 4 because literally every single piece. And this was, I think, the other reason it really resonated with me was the original thesis of Reliance, where I'm always looking to apply ideas from multiple domains. And I think people just don't do that enough. And it's just beautiful to incorporate that. Like, the whole idea of, like, we are just building or doing something because we want it to be great or beautiful. I think people should just do it for the sake of it. So anyway, I had a lot of ideas. I'll probably give you the top 2 or 3 in the interest of time. So one was this idea of one size fits one, which I think is very beautifully captured in Unreasonable Hospitality, where there was, like, intentionality in making sure that especially in the software business, because we're trying to be like, there's a lot of hype around PLG and scale, and make sure you can really convert the whole experience to scale quickly and automate everything. But I think people forget that at the end of the day, the user, the buyer, the journey that somebody has is a human being on the other side. And everybody's different. So one side does fit one. And yes, you want to do all the system of scale, but you always want to think about what's more important to that particular user or that customer in time, and involve a culture of addressing that and thinking about it. Because many times we just go so extreme, especially in the software industry, that we forget that it's a different user and a human being on the other side. So adding that human touch really helped. So that was just like, I just told my entire team is like, every time you have a touch point, yes, you want to follow the patterns and the playbooks we have developed, but remember that one size fits one. And I think the key shift it made from people's perspective is it changed the way we were serving people from the point of view they wanted to be served, not our point of view on how we wanted to serve them. And that happens a lot in the industry, especially in enterprise SaaS, where you forget that, hey, you have a playbook, you have built a culture of how you do things, but you first have to understand how they want to be served and then adopt. And I think people have started to do that really well. The second big thing was setting conflicting goals. And I love this one really. For Reliance, we have two core cultural values and goals. One is called amp it up with excellence, and second is called unreasonable hospitality. And the whole idea of amp it up is we want to go high velocity, extreme energy, extreme intensity, extreme excellence, and do it fast. Do it really fast. And I had this a little survey I did in my all hands and I asked people like, how long do you think it took to build the Empire State Building? How long did the first Visa card went out? And we asked 4 questions and people had, answers that were like a couple of years, couple of days. And it was like a few hours and everybody was like jaw dropping shocked. It's like, if you put your mind to it, you can build that fast. And then this idea of like unreasonable hospitality, like you have to really cater to everybody. And they're actually at odds with each other. If I'm trying to make sure I have the perfect experience for Hannah and Madhu while I'm trying to also build a system of scale really fast, you can't do that at the same time. But what it ends up doing is that tension helps people organically find a balance that would still be better than one or the other extremes. And I think that's where the magic gets found. And as you scale, people just do the things in a systematic way. The book really captures this idea of, hey, unreasonable hospitality is extreme, but what's the opposite of it? Reasonable. And that's not a bad way to do business. If you try to be unreasonable and you end up being reasonable, that's okay. That's in some instances because you can't be 100 on everything. And the final one was don't let adversity go to waste ever. And I think this was something that, especially as a second time founder, I really took to heart, which is no matter how great your startup is or how well things are going, and there are always going to be some problems. And it is, and I think, as a culture here, at least, like, we don't really talk about that enough. Even when you ask a random founder of a portfolio company how things are going, and everybody's, oh, it's great. But like, it's never great. It's never great. So, but the idea here is like, people forget that if you were able to find a way out of that adversity, whatever may be the problem, it requires the whole village, which is your company, to come together and solve a problem in a unique way. And I think what happens is, instead of as a team freaking out about that adversity, if you really take that as an opportunity to say, all right, yes, we know we have a problem, but how do we solve for it? And how do we get creative? And in fact, I had now started building a list of what things we did well in adversity and incorporate those into the core strategy when we're not in adversity, because you actually end up building a interesting structure that was more efficient and more useful and operationally better than what you were doing before, because you couldn't afford to do a lot of things. And then so, well, I can go on forever, but I would say those are the top three for me.
Those are great lessons. And one of the things that we often get asked about as part of our field guide or as part of the content that we put out is, how do I build a great culture as a founder? And that's one of the questions that early stage founders are thinking about right from the beginning, because that's about building a great company. And I think one of the things that struck us about Unreasonable Hospitality is that Will is a great people manager. He knows how to coach people, how to build those moments of transformation intentionally, as you said. What was that process like for you when you first brought these ideas into the company? How did you coach people into changing their mindsets?
Yeah, I think there's two pieces that I took, which is what was this idea that I started with. And I think you have to sometimes do both of this. And I think it has a positive incarnation. And I would say maybe negative is probably a strong word, but like a deadline oriented incarnation. I'll speak both of it. So the positive incarnation is, I asked everybody that, and pretty much we did this almost individually because we're a small company, 60, 70 people. You can still touch point with everybody, but if not with everybody in form of teams. And we would say, pick a company, pick a product, pick a athlete, pick whatever you respect personally that is elite, that you think is exceptionally well, right? And everybody likes different, and it was a very personal question, right? And we wanted to say you can pick something, a company that you admire, a business you admire, because maybe that's top of mind. Or maybe you can pick a transformation story you really admire, anything that you personally like. And then I asked everybody to name those things. What so happened, because I think it was a work setting, everybody ended up picking most 80% of the time a work oriented example, a company or culture, a person they admire or whatever. And I was like, so my next question was, so what's stopping you from being that person? What do you think is the blocker? And everybody had a tough time answering, and people went like, oh, sometimes, oh, it's a different stage, a different timing, or they have resources, blah, blah. Yeah, but if you look at the whole journey, it's the same as you. What's stopping you from being that? And I think like the positive incarnation of that, opening the aperture for people to understand this, was like, there is nobody behind the curtain. I think what happens is, when you look at whatever it is that you admire and you feel yourself and you project yourself sitting in the audience, admiring that company, that person, that thing, and people make this inherent assumption that, oh, that is cut from a different cloth. That's just not me. That's elite, and then I'm different. And everybody does that to themselves. And I think it's a single idea that whatever that elite thing was built are built by regular people like you, and you don't have to wait for permission. There is nobody behind the curtain. You want to go back and get that thing going yourself. And so I think I repeated this enough number of times where people say, yeah, like, I can be the best, I can be amazing. And then the negative or the strong incarnation is, as you start to enforce that, you then basically say, this is the expectation, after people have understood of what we are trying to do, and be very clear about it, and give people an opportunity to opt in. I pretty much told people, like, we are going to operate with extreme excellence and unreasonable hospitality. I understand and respect if that's not for you. I will help you find a better place and a better job. But we have to do what's right for Reliance and for this company and this community that want to be a lead. And if you don't want to do that, then that's fine. There's no judgment. But this is not the right place for you. And then I think there's that polarity of, hey, you can be extreme, and if you don't want to be, you shouldn't be here, which sometimes like gets perceived a little negatively as tough. But I think it's needed. And so that's where that was my petri dish to set up the foundation of, like, all right, you have both opted in and you now believe you can be great. All right, now here's the framework of how we're going to do it. And that's when I first then started to approach and express the idea of unreasonable hospitality. And the second concrete framework there was, you have to reinforce the cultural aspect you care about in actions every day. I think this is where most founders, and I think big or small company, doesn't matter, get this wrong, which is, you're busy, things are happening all the time, and you just forget. And culture is all about what you do day to day. Like, people don't care if you had a good swag or not. At least that's my belief. It's how you feel every single day is what is important. And I express that in two ways in day-to-day operations. And I recommend this to everybody, which is, number one, if you have your 4, 3, 5 cultural values, whatever they may be, in every all hands, what I do is I will have a section called momentum stories. And those stories are people, it could be an intern or it could be a C-level executive, how they operationalized one of those 4 cultural values. And there'll be 8 or 10 stories we will share every all hands. And what I do intentionally is, I share the story and I give the detail on that story. So it's very important that even the newly joined intern feels that he or she and I have never talked, but I know what they're working and how they made a difference. And I think that changes the game. And it's work, but I think it's so worth it, because you can then express that. And so you really have to reinforce this kind of like cultural element over and over again. And we've been doing that at the all hands consistently for people to really recognize that.
I, I think listening to you talk, and it's coincidental because Hannah and I were just talking about Atomic Habits, which is this other book
Yeah.
about build. And it sounds like what you're saying is building culture is about building these good habits.
Yeah.
It needs to be reinforced every day, which is such a great way of thinking about it. So I have the dreaded two-part question for you, which is how has your team responded? What feedback have you gotten? And then how have your customers responded?
Yeah. So I'll give you two examples from the customer's point of view first. So here is the customer's response. So we were in the middle of a deal. It was a competitive deal we were working on, and we had a customer trying to pick between us and one of our competitors. And we were close to the final decision, and we knew the decision maker was like, "Hey, I'm really busy. The economic buyer there. But this weekend, I'm going to review and we're going to make a final decision." We're like, "We're happy to serve, blah, blah, blah." So, because of this reinforcement of culture, one of my persons asked them, "Hey, when are you going to review it on the weekend?" And they're like, "Oh, I have some meetings in the morning, but I'm going to do it at 10 a.m." So, this person knew what this person was going to look for. So, somebody from my team, my solution engineer, at 9:58, an email landed in our customer's inbox, which is a short recorded Loom video, which first said, "Thank you for making time for evaluating our platform on the weekend. I know this is what you care about. You may not need this, but here is a quick way of doing this and how you should navigate through yourself." Monday, obviously, we signed with the customer, and they explicitly said that was the main reason, because they felt that, yes, we had some pros and cons in certain features and the value and the price, but they felt like they were having a partner, not a vendor. And that small little extra effort, which probably took no more than 20 minutes from our side, moved the needle. So that's one. Second, from how it's impacted our customers, I was talking to one of the chief privacy officers and a CISO on a common call with one of our customers who were also now, as they have moved into their roles, are adopting us again. And I was just like, "Hey, I just want to solicit feedback." And the person said, "There's one thing that I like about Reliance the most is that when we have demos or conversations, it feels like you are consulting with us from an educative manner. It's not salesy. You're really trying to understand our problem. And here is the person XYZ on your team that I have truly expressed unreasonable hospitality." And the customer said those words to me. And I was like, win. That was like from a founder who's trying to like reshift the company. When you know your customers feel your cultural value and re-express that to you, that's magical. So those are two stories from a customer standpoint. From an internal team standpoint, I think once I laid the foundation of what we were going to do with those positive and the tough incarnation of it, people, like, the whole idea stuck like a magnet to steel. Like, it was instant. People appreciated it. And I feel like now Unreasonable Hospitality has become the core kernel around which we build everything in the company. And I'm very proud because I don't even have to reinforce. It has become a flywheel that is reinforcing itself. And the best storyline on that tangibly is, we were on a call, we were trying to figure out a problem, and one of my engineering person and one of my sales guy were like, "Yeah, I think we need to solve this with unreasonable hospitality. We need to unreasonable hospitality this." And it was like really cool because it was completely a counterintuitive idea at that point, but it made so much sense. So it has been like at the kernel where people are sharing stories about it. And people, like, when they have these experiences, they'll bring this back. And it has become a very interesting, I would say, operational excellence ground now, because people are trying to figure out, hey, things have always been done in this particular way. How can we improve this? And how can we iterate on this? So it has also given a little bit of the spark of innovation coming from a completely different idea of, hey, we always do something in this particular way. Why can't we ask this different? And the thing that stuck the most, and this is actually directly from the book, so I'll double click on it. Will from at 11 Madison Park decided to get rid of the podium when you enter a restaurant, right? And it's very clear, right? Whenever you go to a restaurant, there's somebody standing behind a podium. They're going to look at their iPad. You'll say, "Hey, I have a reservation. All right, table 24, take them over there," right? And there's nothing wrong with that experience, but it is already a little barrier. Like you are there, there's a podium, there's somebody behind you. It feels like a transaction. And it's like, how do you change that to an enjoyable experience? And Will's point of view was like, when you go to somebody's house, an acquaintance or a friend, how do they greet you? They open at the door, they're smiling, big hugs, arms wide open, and they're welcoming you. And there's nothing between you and them. It's not a transaction. And people really took that point to heart. And now it's okay, every time we touch base, how can it feel not like a transaction? Yes, we are selling software and the people are buying and somebody's paying for it, but how do you iterate on that? So it's become like a whole transformational pillar and the kernel of how we do everything at Reliance with every single touch point, and has frankly changed the company's culture in a completely different dimension.
It's
Yeah, that's
amazing.
awesome.
For our last question, as we think about, as we serve software founders and we love to think with them about how to build great cultures, especially in this sort of like deliberate, intentional way that you laid out here, what advice would you offer an early stage founder who's in the trenches right now, but is
Yeah.
already thinking about this?
Yeah, I would say the number one thing is culture is one of those things. If you're not explicit about it, it will become whatever it becomes, and it's very hard to unwind. And it's systematically hard to unwind. I think I've appreciated for a long time that how long it takes to fix things. So the first comment I'll make is don't take it for granted, don't take it lightly. It's very hard to reverse things. That's number one. Second, I would say is that people keep forgetting that, and especially this is true for tech founders, is that yes, you want to build the coolest, deepest, most meaningful transformational tech, but we are doing SaaS, and the SaaS ends with service, and it's software as a service. So there is a element of service where if all things eventually become commodity, especially if you're building on AI oriented world, then what really differentiates you from you and your competition is service. And service starts internally first, and therefore you have to fix your culture because that's the only way it gets expressed externally. So that's the second point. And the third thing I would say is you really have to think about what it is that you're doing in the industry, which part of the world you fit, and derive your cultural values from that. Like you can, like many times what happens is you want to look for authenticity. I guess that's the point I'm looking for. Is if you're a fintech company, if you're a crypto company, if you're doing something in enterprise SaaS, whatever it is you're doing, fundamentally understand what it is you're doing, who your buyers are, how do you sell, what is the way of your building, and what role you play in this world, and authentically derive your cultural values from that, where you can say that you can get inspiration from a lot of places, but there has to be something authentically you in that environment because it's really hard to stick. People always talk about great examples from Meta or Facebook or Amazon or Google, blah, blah, blah. And those are things that are great to get inspired from, but it doesn't work if you don't really embody it within your authenticity. And the final thing is the enforcement of it in action. Culture is all what you do, not what you say. And it's really important that as founders, you are able to express that as one or two things that act as North Star. For example, the way I do it is especially when I was hiring people and hiring execs, I was like, hey, this is going to be hard. We want to build something excellent. But what I will ensure, and you can hold me accountable if I don't, is you don't have any emotional baggage while you're doing your job because the job is hard enough as is. So a tangible example is like I tell them like the way I think of my job is I'm a race car track owner. And my job is to hire the best driver at the best position and take out the scree and roadblocks and nails from the roads. And if I can do that, we will win and it will become a successful thing. It's like that tiny thing where, hey, I have an 8 a.m. call with my boss tomorrow. And I spent all of my afternoon on how I'm going to talk about this. How is that person going to react? And I've spent all of my creative and mental energy worrying about that conversation instead of doing an excellent thing in my job. And I try to eliminate that because that's where I think a lot of companies go to die. So that was like one specific example of mine of, hey, what do you work towards? What does tangibly mean? If you achieve all of these cultural values you have, what is going to happen? And this is what I use. And especially with my executive team is you should never have to spend an extra second worrying about that. Because if we don't do that, we have a problem and I'm not doing my job. And I think that's probably a summary of my advice is be intentional and operationalize it every day. It doesn't work otherwise.
Thank you so much. That I feel like that's a great note to end on, of an inspiring note that you have to do it every day and be intentional. We really appreciate you joining us today. Even more so, appreciate the recommendation to have read and reviewed Unreasonable Hospitality. I think it has been as influential at Unusual as at Reliance. We are so inspired by it and fired up to really bring it into our culture and our work as well. So truly thank you for the recommendation and for joining us today. We are so excited to share your story with our audience.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.